Welcome in to another Coinage chat, ladies and gentlemen. I am the host of Coinage, Zack, Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studios in New York City. Another exciting Thursday chat for you, and very happy to welcome on the space with us today a person that we've been looking forward to talking to for quite some time, actually. Today we got Keith Grossman on the space with us, Moonpay's president of enterprise and former president of Time, joining us here. Keith, thanks so much for taking the time, man.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. This is, as I said, this is one that a lot of people in our community, including Megan Casper, has been pushing for quite some time. I think because it's rare that we have people on the space that both understand Web3 and media as well as you do. It's not something that happens very often, and it's not, I think, common to see a lot of people make that jump from the traditional media world into experimenting with Web3. But if anyone's been paying attention, Keith Grossman's one of the top minds in making that jump, and it's something that I'm excited to get into with you today, man. But first off, let's just maybe explain why you even wanted to get involved in Web3 and kind of what you saw as this huge revolution was forming.
I mean, well, first, I think everyone would agree, right? And everyone who's in this room today would agree that, like, when you engage with what I see as the future state of the internet, it's hard to want to go back, right? It's sort of like the first time you saw high definition television, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, like I can't go back to my standard television. And what I saw was really during the pandemic, a moment where I realized I was fully isolated and my digital identity was just as valuable as my physical identity, right? And that was like a really interesting understanding for me, because up until that point, what I was thinking was that my digital identity was an extension of my physical identity. And for the first time ever in 2020, I realized I was like, no, it's the exact same thing, right? Most people, the hundreds of people in the room today, most people will only know me through an interaction like this, or through Twitter, or through Instagram, or through LinkedIn, or through email. And very few people will actually know me in real life. And so the realization that the two were equal was fascinating to me. The second was just this technology of a token being able to verify identity on a blockchain. And what I saw with that was really, wow, if I want to own something in the real world, I can do that very easily. But if my digital identity is equal to my physical identity, then I might want to own something in the digital world as well. Mm-hmm. And in that instance, I was like, I can't believe that this technology is unlocking that reality. And, to step back for 1 second, the thing that I find fascinating about Web3 is not just the token to blockchain interaction. Like, in my mind, it's the complete reinvention of where the internet's going. It's the token plus blockchain interaction to unlock online ownership, to respect digital privacy. But it's also, the application of GPT to change the engagement that a consumer can have with a brand or a marketer or a journalist even, or metaversal experiences in terms of what the interactions can be for hybrid realities. So, like, in my mind, like, all of those things were just so exciting. I just thought it was one of the most transformative moments that we would see in our lifetime.
Yeah, and there's a lot to get into around kind of, I guess, how you capitalized on some of those possibilities when you were still president at Time, and we can get into timepieces and kind of how it, I think, set the bar when it comes to traditional media organizations dipping a toe, and probably a time beyond just dipping a toe, in leaning into NFTs and that kind of technology to kind of, again, put your most important IP, I think, out there in front of your fans. And certainly was kind of something I saw in kind of an example to follow when it comes to, even new media trying to do some of that stuff as well. But you jumped to Moonpay, and I think that's another important thing to highlight here in terms of how Moonpay is playing in all of this as well. When we talk about the focus of this space, which is kind of onboarding the masses, and if it is still kind of the parallel to being the early internet days, what that looks like, because, even us here, it's been clear that, people need help. people need help. If you've never minted an NFT before, it might be tough. You might want to use a credit card, but it also seems, I guess, a little counterintuitive in trying to get people to set up wallets. So, I mean, there are a lot of complex questions there, but clearly Moonpay is a company that soared to valuation north of billions, by the way. Talk to me about what's so important there, and what you've seen since you joined in terms of the adoption cycle as NFT prices have come down, how you've looked at that problem.
Sure. So if I could step back for 1 second, right? I think what's really important is to separate out NFTs as it relates to collectibles and art, which I think is very real and is an important segment, and then NFTs as it relates to what I think is a much larger sort of uh, evolution and efficiency, I guess is the best way to say it, right? And in that other ecosystem, which is not about collectibles and art, which is what sort of the numbers and the normalization and everything is everyone's paying attention to. In that other ecosystem, my personal view is that it will sort of divide into two camps: the visible experience to the consumer and to brands, and then the invisible experience to consumers and brands. In the invisible experience, like we're really talking about a disruption in any industry that has intermediaries, right? That are creating unnecessary costs. And you're beginning to see it, right? Like if you look at, the state of California just recently announced that they were using Tezos for blockchain sort of interactions for their driver licenses, right? Like I think that you'll see it in, homes and home deeds and medical records. And I think that you'll see the financial industry one day in the future, once regulation is properly instituted and sort of it moves out of sort of the crosshairs of being politicized. I think you'll one day see that the financial industry will be just as disrupted as the music industry was with MP3s, or the publishing industry was with the digitization of the written word, or television was actually with digital video. Um, I think then there's the visible camp of what does this ecosystem look like outside of collectibles and art. And in my mind, I think where the technology really plays well is in memberships, subscriptions, loyalty, and reward programs, right? Like, how can you do these more efficiently? And then in that are things like ticketing, right? Like, how can you do these more efficiently and effectively and create better experiences for consumers? And so stepping back, like what did I see in Moonpay, right? Like, well, when I was at Time proved my thesis that this evolution was real, this evolution in community, this new engagement model that consumers wanted. No matter what anyone wanted to say in the beginning, and people like to rewrite history a little bit, but like we were mocked in the beginning, right? About entering into this space. But then people saw that the returns were very real, and the engagement in the community was very real because we were rallying people around psychographics. But what timepieces really did for Time was it created a new annuity stream for Time, right? It created a new subscription. And it was a subscription that, instead of saying buy a subscription first, as a traditional media model would say, it was a subscription that said, do you want to join this community? And this community has these like-minded individuals of a certain psychographic. Oh, and by the way, we're going to give you access and experiences. And along with that, you'll get a subscription that you can connect into Time and remove the paywall. And so I think that what people don't realize is that the technology for a lot of companies is going to be in this area of memberships, loyalty, rewards, and subscriptions. It's not going to be in the collectibles arena, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good area to get into, actually, because so many people think about NFTs being art, and certainly that's where we saw the huge wave and excitement and adoption, and creator royalties as well being one of the huge promises of the space, and certainly sucked a lot of people in, myself included.
Myself included as well.
Yeah, but when you talk about digital memberships, I do think that is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because so many other, I think, media orgs now are looking at that, and we ourselves at Coinage, we started that same thing, was let's put out a free subscription NFT, and we did that when we dropped our Doquan interview from last year, which won a Cebu Award, by the way, so shout out to the team for that.
By the way, it was amazing. I loved how you did this. And to Megan Casper's credit, again, I know we gave it in the beginning, she was screaming from the hilltop, pay attention to this, pay attention to this, pay attention to this. And, it was great to watch you enter in that way.
Thank you. Yeah, no. Well, so this is an alpha league for everybody, and I know we had more than 1,000 people just join the space. So if you're just tuning in, we got Keith Grossman here from Moonpay, and what we were talking about, I guess, around subscriptions is this is the alpha league. Is that we dropped it for free for everyone who wanted to watch our stuff first. So we were trying to find our super fans, and Lee Jin from Variance talked a lot about creators finding their super fans and really leaning into them. And so we started with the free subscription NFT. It's essentially the subscription. And, traditional media probably wouldn't do it this way in terms of dropping something for free and then trying to see, all right, what can we do to deliver value to those people? We've been talking a lot with Web3 social founders about the cold start problem, the idea of you can't really have a competing social network with a Facebook or an Instagram until you have users. And how do you deliver and unlock the value of those network effects to those first users? And their answer is to kind of, give them tokens and let them own the thing. And that's essentially what we're doing here at Coinage, too. We had more than 5,000 people mint those NFTs back in the day last year. They were free then. We paused it down in terms of minting, and they're not going to be free this year. And so that's essentially value unlock for your first readers, your listeners, your viewers.
I mean, and that's what's fascinating about where things could go in this space, right? And this is a tangential sort of conversation, but it's an absolutely fascinating conversation that, historically, networks were built, such as the Facebooks of the world, or even Uber, right, which is a great network, and then decisions were made at the top, and no value accretion was provided to the members of the network who were the earliest adopters, those who joined earliest and were able to build the value of that network. And the technology at least allows for that to now be a possibility, right?
Yeah, and it also, I guess, allows you to pass, I suppose, some of that value, because what is the Web2 thinking, I think, that I've landed on is if you are a digital media publication or a show, whatever, essentially the Web2 model is grow your audience as large as possible and then sell ads against that audience, which is not exactly the best user experience. But if you can kind of create, as you said, these other revenue streams or create it to where you put your viewer or reader literally in the co-ownership seat, you kind of change that model around to where they're not a means to an end, but the end in and of itself.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, you also look at it from a subscription perspective, right? But the bigger issue that actually scared me, and I think people should really start to pay attention to, is that as it relates to privacy, consumer privacy. Now, everyone likes to say that they're pro privacy, right? Like I remember, I was, before I joined Moonpay, like one of my last presentations was at Columbia Business School, and somebody said to me beforehand, they said, I think that this evolution in Web3 is very hypocritical. And I said to them, well, every evolution is hypocritical to an extent, right? It's really, though, what's the North Star that you're looking towards? And my point to the group, and it was very interesting, was I said, everyone in the room who has a Facebook, who believes in consumer privacy, please raise your hand. And everyone raised their hand. And then I said, everyone in the room who has a Facebook account, Instagram account, or WhatsApp account, please raise your hand. And everyone raised their hand. And I go, great. Stand up if you trust Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp with your data. No one stood up, right? and I tell this story because it's really interesting when you realize that people believe one thing, they have a conviction on one end, but convenience always trumps conviction, right? And people are going to make that trade-off, whether they realize it or not, for what the convenience factor is. And so, like, if you were then to step back for Web3 for a second, and you were to say, well, what are the convictions of Web3? The convictions of Web3 are self-custody and decentralization, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that those are really important convictions to have, right? But as you look at the mass adoption of the space, what's most likely going to happen is mass adoption will happen with convenience, right? And convenience will mean that, most people will not know that they have a digital wallet. So like the idea of self-custody will probably become some sort of hybrid model of some sort, right? Mm-hmm. And that's at least for mass adoption. It doesn't mean that it goes away. Like there will be niche areas that people will have it. There will be people who will know about it. But it does mean that as we move into the masses, like things like self-custody will become probably semi-self-custody. Things like full decentralization will probably become partially decentralized. But these are all really good things to strive towards. These are great convictions, but the convictions always give way to conveniences for mass adoption.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned convenience, because that's been one of the things too. Even when we launched our free subscriber passes at Coinage, was kind of, which by the way, there is a Gleam link tied to this space. So if anyone's listening, feel free to enter that, and we can give some away on the space. But the convenience factor is interesting because there's pros and cons to that. I mean, you're right. Probably no one would stand up and say they trust the Facebooks of the world. But also, as in advertising, having that is extremely convenient. To know someone came to your site, tracking things like that, being able to revisit them afterwards became an issue for us because we didn't collect any data or emails or anything. Which retrospectively, as we relaunch and kind of put these out there, it'd be nice to let people know. But those are the trade-offs in Web3. And if you really are convicted in those beliefs, then you got to lean into them. And so that's, I guess, the next question on that front is, I was reading some of your thoughts as well in bull and bear markets, and kind of the projects that really lean into those convictions will survive. Is just, I myself have kind of wondered, all right, how many people are really in this space because of those convictions? Since we're trying to decentralize media at Coinage, and trying to go about co-ownership of actually, our IP and what we're building in a different way, versus just people trying to flip some of this stuff and make money. And that I'm curious to get your take on, is if that's a third conviction of a lot of people in this space, which no harm, no foul. But making money is a piece of this too.
Okay. So I think that what's really important is when you look at the collectible space primarily, art will probably have a longer time frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a collectible space, flipping is definitively part of that ecosystem, right? When you look at the membership space, rewards, subscriptions, loyalty, if I do my job correctly, nobody's referring to these things as Web3 loyalty programs or subscription programs or membership programs in 2-3 years. They're just calling them membership programs, the same way that nobody's calling anything a .com company anymore. They're just companies, right? And my goal is to make the technology invisible, right? And so it's not that consumers will be cognizant of the fact that something is semi-custodial or decentralized, but rather that when they look at the experiences, they'll say, I want that experience because it's a better experience online, right? The challenge that we have right now is there's not a lot of real world experiences yet to show great experiences online using this technology, right? Now there's like bits and pieces. If you look at Starbucks, if you look at Nike, if you look at Universal, you look at Aloe Yoga, right? Like you look at like Fox is beginning to dip into it, and you see like tons of green shoots alongside all of the sort of bad news too. If you look at those, you start to realize like we will have our moments where like it was equivalent to Steve Jobs holding up the iPod saying 1,000 songs in your pocket, and people saying like, oh, wow, I don't care about the technology anymore. I just want that experience. But we're not there yet. What we are in right now is the Intel Inside period of Web3, right? And what I mean by that is like, if you think back, and Zack, I don't know how old you are, but I'm a Web3 geriatric, okay? So like in my entire life,
anyone post 30, I think, in the space feels old, by the way. So I think that's
so,
kind of the cutoff. So I'm with you.
I'm post 40, right? So I like when I had my first computer, it was a Dell 386 with 4 megabytes of RAM and a 256 megabyte hard drive, right? And I remember when I got my upgrade to an Austin 486, right? Austin's not even in business anymore. I had 16 megabytes of RAM. I had an active matrix TFT screen. I was so excited. I had a 14.4 BPS modem, and I remember when I got up to a 56.8, right? Like, and it was the coolest thing on the planet. But when this was all happening, Intel had an ad campaign, and that ad campaign, you might know it or not, was called Intel Inside, right?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this ad campaign?
Yeah.
Okay. It literally is one of the most famous ad campaigns ever. I bring this up because when Steve Jobs all of a sudden said 1,000 songs in your pocket, he essentially rendered that whole entire ad campaign useless, right? Because nobody cared about the technology anymore. They just wanted the experience. And if I was to ask you today, right, of all the devices you have in your pocket or in your life, what percentage have Intel chips in them? You would say to me, what?
Oh, probably. I don't know. Probably none. I don't know.
You or like, I don't care, I don't know, I just want them to work, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm sure you have tons of Intel chips in them. Intel's still in business, it's very successful, right? But like the point is that people will move on in this space from talking about the technology and they'll shift to talking about the experience. And like that's the tweener phase that we're in right now. And to give you like an idea, like when I started right out of college, I started as an assistant at Wired magazine, right? So you can see it right behind me, right? And like this is my career, was like I started at Wired. I'll never forget the day I started in my first capacity. I got a call from my grandfather, who's not a nice person, but that's a different story. But like I get a call from my grandfather, and he says to me, "I don't know why you took a job with that brand. That internet thing was so cute. You all thought that we were going to buy dog food online. Ha ha ha." Right?
Yeah.
That was literally on day one. That's what he said to me. And like, I don't know about you, but last week I did buy dog food online. Dot 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 from the largest company on the planet, Amazon. Right?
Yeah, well, I guess that's the biggest question, though, right? Because if this is where it's heading, and we're seeing this kind of evolution, and I think everyone now is kind of in a similar spot where they're saying, it's not about the technology, it's about how it's used. And it sounds like you're saying one of the more exciting pieces of where this goes is more on, I guess, the digital membership side, or maybe even just the technology becoming something that creators or whoever will leverage. And I think we are already seeing that. I don't know if you've been seeing what Ticketmaster's been doing, but it's especially interesting to pay attention to in terms of, basically cutting out scalpers and the idea of letting these creators deliver the experiences more directly to their fans. But is that kind of what's the most exciting, I guess, use case of that technology shifting back into the background? But also, what does it mean for people who might want to, I guess, invest in some of these things? Is it just to like pay attention to which creators are smart about it? How do you look at making money in the space if all of a sudden it's not, the L1s that are saying we're the technology everyone's going to build on top of, if they're the Intels? How do people maybe, I guess, continue to make money in this space?
Okay, so I will never give financial advice. So
Yes.
I will give you
Nor
a
will I.
perspective. I will give you a perspective on what I see in the space, which is um, like I think that you have to step back and you have to look at Ticketmaster for a second, and you have to think like this is a very wonderful sort of evolution of their business and a natural evolution of their business. Ticketing is a perfect example of a sort of space that they provide an experience to somebody or access an experience to somebody, and then historically that ticket devalues down to zero with the exception of an emotional connection to the consumer for the experience that they have if the consumer holds on to that ticket. And what the technology now allows for is for that ticket to no longer devalue down to zero, still maintain the emotional connection, but also act as an access point to so many other experiences because it essentially can act as a gateway or a token to open up other things, for the first time ever.
Mm-hmm.
And tickets have never had that capability before. And so like you all of a sudden have this really unbelievable experience to or ability to take an experience that devalued to zero and actually increase its value to infinity, depending on what you want to add to it. Now, where would I look if I was in this space? Like I would look at sort of the evolution of computing in the 1990s when it came to mainstream adoption. And, if you look at it, the first thing you saw was everyone talking about the foundational levels, right? Like the chips. And then people started to talk about the experiences. When you look at the first level of applications that entered into the internet at like the mass level that really changed people's lives, like at a major level was like I would say like the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world and the Twitters of the world, right? Like, and if you think back to when they came out, like their missions were really grandiose missions, right? The missions of these Googles were like unlock the world's information. Facebook was, like, make everyone your friend in the world, right? Like Twitter was like a global community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these were unbelievable, grandiose visions. And then the second group of innovations that came out on top of it, and Brad Stone over at Bloomberg actually wrote and a former colleague wrote a great book called The Upstarts, um, were companies like Airbnb and Uber. And the reason I bring up Airbnb and Uber is those companies didn't actually evolve until the base layers came out and people started to really get engagements in the ecosystem that they could see real value return on. And so I think that what you're going to start to see in Web3 is you're going to see very simple experiences come out, right? Like Starbucks, it's not a complex experience, Starbucks, what they built. It's not a complex experience, what Nike's built. But it's really important that they build the foundation and they build it slowly and they build it correctly. So that way they can integrate it into their larger ecosystem. So that way everything can be unified, right? I think once that membrane is sort of overlaid in what I would say is like the larger ecosystem, then you're going to start to see things really accelerate up. And I think when you start to layer blockchain technology with GPT technology with metaverse experiences and AR in particular, like you're going to start to see things accelerate to a point where the experience that you will be able to have online in probably 15 years, 20 years will be so drastically different than the experience you have today. And if that sounds weird, like the things that I would ask you to think about is like what the world was like prior to the iPhone. Or like, like somebody pointed out to me that there was a 50-year period, I think back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where electricity and the telephone, the airplane, and the automobile all came out, right? So if you were born prior to that 50-year period, you had one belief in existence. And if you were born after that 50-year period, you have a completely different belief in that existence. Yesterday, and I apologize for the soliloquy, Zach, but yesterday there was this great article in the New York Times about 1,000 CEOs asking for GPT technology and AI technology to stop sort of until they can figure out the right ethical boundaries.
Yes.
I don't personally believe that will ever stop, right? Like asking innovation to stop once it's been out of Pandora's box is near impossible. And so like we have to be cognizant of the fact that what we're seeing today, whether it's with GPT technology or if you saw the Kanye West voiceover, like that's been floating around the internet, and I probably watched that, 1,000 times in the past week.
Yeah.
This is the worst the technology will ever be. It's only getting better. And so from here, we're going to start to see sort of our online experiences, our digital experiences really accelerate. And I think what blockchain technology is going to do is just enable for efficiencies to be unleashed that have never been unleashed before.
Yeah, and abilities to co-own a lot of that efficiency and value as well, which I think is still one of the most intriguing pieces of all this. We have an episode coming out tomorrow focused on Web3 social, and you talk about the Googles and Facebooks, the Twitters of the world, and that co-ownership piece, I think, thus far has been one of those elements that has maybe sucked a lot of people into the space, because rather than having a big tech giant maybe use some of those learnings and data on you, what could happen if you control that data and can be compensated by sharing it? And that's one of the things that we're going to get into with that episode coming out on Coinage's YouTube tomorrow. But Keith, I mean, you mentioned off the top that we'd be interested to see who kind of hops into this space. We were talking about Julia LaRoche. She's in the space as well.
Bring her up.
I mean,
So like,
so many,
I'm
so one of the things... One of the things we wanted to do is Keith is co-hosting this space, so I'm going to let you bring up whoever you want to bring up, because that's one of the things we like.
I want to bring up Julia LaRoche, okay?
See, Grant Cardone's floating around in the space too.
I see Matthew the first is in the space too. Like I don't want to bring him up. I just want to acknowledge because he's such a pain in the ass sometimes, right? Like I love him, but I want to bring up Julia LaRoche if Julia will come up.
Yeah, bring up whoever you want. This is one of the things that we wanted to shout out here too. I'll let you handle that in the background while I also promote one of the winners in our Gleam contest, because again, this is the whole idea is what can we do when we are a community-owned show? What would you be asking, Keith, honestly? And we want our community to weigh in on all that stuff as well. We just pulled one of the winners from our Gleam link that is pinned in the space. Miraz.lens will DM you to give you your Coinage subscriber NFT, my friend. And if anyone else wants to apply for that as well and enter the giveaway, feel free at the link that's pinned in the space But we've got about, I don't know, Keith, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we got like 30 minutes left here, but you mentioned kind of where all that goes, and we'll bring speakers up and let them ask questions as well as we kind of move into the rest of this space. But I mean, around that digital membership piece and kind of the Web3 social thing and the Ticketmaster thing, what is, Starbucks included, what I guess is the thing that you're most excited about, the project right now in the space you're most excited about when it comes to unlocking some of that stuff and really, again, getting back to the value-based revolution that I think everyone in the space is excited about?
Sure. So, like, if I could step back, because I didn't answer a question that you asked me before. So I want to
Okay.
answer it just quickly, which was like, what was it about Moonpay that excited me about Moonpay? And what it really was at the end of the day was, they have built, or we have now built a widget that allows you to enter into the ecosystem using your credit card, right? So you never need to know or own, you never have to like buy Ethereum directly or be native into the space. So it's very seamless to enter into the space. You will see in the coming, weeks or so that like we will be unveiling do not have a wallet flows, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
we'll be able to provide semi-custodial solutions, and ultimately we could do everything front to back without ever having to showcase that you're entering into the crypto ecosystem, but take advantage of the crypto technologies, right? And so, like, to me, that's a huge boon because I have to think about the experience of like my mother, and this was the example we were talking about earlier. And this is a real example. This is not the mom test. Like, a real example is I remember the day my mom called me up and said, Keith, put me on the Twitter, right? And when I got her on, it was 2 seconds. And there's zero scenario today that my mom is ever going to say to me, Keith, get me a Coinbase account to my bank account, send fiat to my Coinbase account. She's never even going to say the word fiat. Okay. Like, that's a very inside baseball term. You have to like understand this ecosystem, believe it or not, to like even know that fiat is money,
Yeah.
right? Paper money. Um, buy Ethereum. She's never going to say that. She's never going to say that to me. And then she's going to say, wait 7 days. Now get a digital wallet. Okay. No, that's not happening. Right. Now I could now enter into your space. Like, that is just too many complex solutions. And so your ability to actually look at someone like my mother, who is not going to change her behavior and is going to want to use a credit card to enter into the ecosystem and then just have a better experience. Like, let the tech do what the tech does in the background. The same way that you have no clue what your iPhone does in the background, let the tech do what the tech does right. Right. And so I think that what attracted me to Moonpay was the ability that it had every component for me to be able to have these conversations with big enterprises and allow them to enter into the ecosystem. Um, so I didn't want to dodge that question. Like, I thought it was a very important question, and I feel like it just got lost in our
I think,
conversation.
well, I think it is important, and it is one of those pieces that, like, again, even us, and same thing. It was like, all right, we're doing this digitalized, decentralized media revolution here at Coinage, and let people actually own what we're building. As you said, like the Do Kwon piece was the first one that put us on the map. But if you want to own that IP, guess what? You mint an NFT, and you are literally opened up to be a member of our co-op, our DAO. Steer the funds, tell us what to cover. Guests like Keith. That's exactly how this happened, by the way. Megan Casper, one of our network NFT holders, saying you got to have Keith on, and we
Well,
listened to it.
thank you to the DAO then, right? Like, I really appreciate it, and I hope this is an interesting thing, But like, then the other reason, and then we'll jump to what excites me is time proved out my thesis, but no matter how hard I tried, at the end of the day, we only minted about 35,000 tokens, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's about it, right? Moonpay with Universal minted millions, right? And like, when I look at Moonpay with Fox and like Moonpay and what we've been able to do with some of these big players, the hypermint infrastructure allows for enterprise ready sort of solutions. And so to me, the ability to scale up, like, this is going to be an evolution where an infinite number of tokens are ultimately going to be minted out,
Yeah.
right? So I needed to have a place that had the infrastructure that could scale at that extreme.
Yeah.
And so that's where I go. I mean, Starbucks to me is the most exciting, and so is Nike. But I'll focus on Starbucks for a second because I have like a real personal history on it. When I was at Bloomberg, and I was the global chief revenue officer over at Bloomberg Media for many years, and I was there for, I think it was 4 or 5 years. And when I was there was a terminal function that allowed you to scrape earnings reports to see how people used certain words and in their earnings. And what I saw with my team, and we would always take this out to clients to show people the value of how Bloomberg Media like provided value to our customers. But what I saw was Howard Schultz and his CFO used the term mobile 5 times as much as their competitors,
Yeah.
right? Back in the day. And now, like, if you think about this, like, look at Starbucks today. Like, everyone essentially has the Starbucks mobile app, right? And it's ubiquitous. But like, how many of you have like the Dunkin' Donuts app? Like, no one, right? No, no.
Shots fired
Like,
at
we laugh
Dunkin'.
about it. Like,
America runs on Dunkin'.
right? No, no, no. But and I like Dunkin' Donuts. There's one like 2 blocks away from me. But like, I
No,
don't
it's
have a
true.
Dunkin'
It's
Donuts app on
absolutely
my
true.
right. And but I do have a Starbucks app. And what I think is Starbucks has the single most successful loyalty program, I would argue, maybe in the world, like up there, like, and yet they're always a bellwether for new technology adoption. And yet, what are they rolling out? A Web3 loyalty program to sort of see how adoption takes place, right? So,
No, it's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. And I wanted to get in on that too, but the site crashed when their mint was going on, which also may just show the demand in terms of, people thinking like, oh, this might not be that big. But as soon as you have a huge player like Starbucks coming in, everybody wanted to be involved. And you mentioned Julia Roche. She's on the space. If she's a speaker, feel free to unmute and hop in, Julia, because she's interviewed
Julia,
Howard
are you
Schultz a
on?
number of times.
Julia, are you on right now? Is she
Oh,
still here?
maybe she's lurking. Maybe she's hanging out.
Yeah, she got upset at us that we kept Julia.
Maybe.
Okay, she's not really here. This is great. So
I
like
don't know.
everyone,
Maybe the
like,
mic on our side might be off. Actually, if we can listen to him, or maybe not. Nope, it's on. So we would be listening. But one of the things, Kurt or Keith, because on that, one of the things that we're looking at around some of that stuff too is just how it goes back to your exact point, which is these are about loyalty programs that are built better. These are about kind of experiences that are built better. And I don't know what your experience. You said you've been doing this firsthand. What you've seen from that Starbucks journey and the stamps, as they call them, what you've seen in terms of maybe that being one that has crossed over into the mainstream.
So I don't think it's crossed over into the mainstream yet, right? Because if you go into any Starbucks and you ask the barista, do you know the Odyssey program? Like, I don't think that 100% of them would say yes. But if you ask any Starbucks barista, do you know Pike Place? I think every barista would say yes, right? So like in my mind, like mainstream would be first evidenced by the fact does every employee at Starbucks aware of it, right? And Starbucks is a complex company because a lot of their employees are distributed, right? Are not in the headquarters. And then second, like I don't think a lot of my friends are familiar with like the Odyssey program. So I think that it's still in its earliest stages, but I think it's a great example of something that I think is going to continue to percolate up, and then ultimately will just become the loyalty program, right? But the thing that people have to remember is we live in this moment in time where like everyone's expectations is so compressed, right? So if you're getting news in clips of 5 seconds, 10 seconds, one day, that news looks so different than if you get your news in spans of like 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, right? And so I would give Starbucks the proper time to sort of establish their cadence. I give Nike this proper time to establish their cadence, to understand their community, to do it correctly. So that way, ultimately, as they prove success with the earliest adopters, then they can get the larger mainstream and the early mainstream, and then the larger sort of holistic approach going with this loyalty program.
Yeah, we've got about 15 minutes left with Keith here around some of the questions. So if you have any questions for him, feel free to request the mic, and we can talk about some of those. But Keith, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you more about the idea of Web3 Media, because I know you coming from the media space, that has been kind of near and dear to your heart, and again, former president of Time. And for us, I wonder if we would agree on a lot of things. And I was reading some of your past thoughts when it comes to where algorithms, where news coverage has kind of pushed into the extremes, and a lot of people have talked about, the CNNs, the MSNBCs of the world, or the Fox Newses of the world, and kind of the polarization and distrust now, honestly, in the news space particularly. And that was kind of, why I left the traditional media world. I'm not entirely sure if you've seen kind of some of these use cases in media to correct for some of that stuff. But that was the dream. And that's kind of what we're working on here at Coinage, is to really unlock the value of being objectively true in your reporting rather than maybe focusing in on driving clicks and sensationalizing things. And it's attracted a few people. I mean, we have the co-founder of Netflix as a member. We talked about Megan Casper. We have her as a member. Got John Woo from Avalanche. You know, it's attracted people that want to see that happen. But I'm curious what your take is on kind of like what Web3 Media can unlock versus the old model that we discussed, and how you see that maybe making it a bit better for society.
Okay, so I think we have an issue as it relates to discourse in our society that for some reason nobody wants to listen to other people, and that's not a media thing, right? That is a societal thing, and I worry about that every day, because the best thing we can be doing is having conversations where we respectfully either agree or disagree with each other and can make holistic decisions. I very much fear that yesterday 1,000 CEOs asked for a stoppage, as opposed to realizing that like we actually have to have a discourse while it's continuing to evolve, in my opinion, because when you ask for a stoppage, you're essentially just as bad as saying like I'm going to turn off to continued evolution because I don't agree with the direction it's going with. And so I think that the state of society and the state of media are two totally different things. You brought up something that's super interesting, which was sensationalized clicks. I would argue that it's not advertisers that are forcing um, media to be bifurcated. It's actually subscribers that are forcing media to be bifurcated.
Hmm.
And to that extent, I would argue that Web3 is not going to solve that problem, right? And we have to be cognizant of that. Like the reality of the technology is it's a really great efficiency play. It unlocks choice for the consumer. The choice that the consumer is presented with now is, do I want to be an owner or do I want to remain as a renter? Do I want to give my information away for free and be extracted, or do I want to hold on to my personal information and have a different type of value exchange with the brand? But subscriptions in media ultimately are leading to a bigger, I would say, downfall in society and discourse than advertisers are. Advertisers, at the end of the day, don't care what the content is. They just want the eyeballs, right? So they're not forcing media to go in one direction or another. Subscribers actually do subscribe based on what the content is. And the New Yorker actually wrote an absolutely brilliant piece a few years ago saying that the reason that certain media brands are starting to go in different directions is because of their subscribers. And it's because the subscribers look at them very similar to how you would look at a sports team, right? And like I'm a Yankees fan, and when the Yankees are winning, I'm watching them more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when the Yankees are losing, I'm watching them less. And so all of a sudden, like you realize that what journalists are being forced into is this environment where everyone's looking at the data surrounding the subscribers and saying, wow, more subscribers are willing to come to us if we write these type of articles, and less subscribers are willing to come to us if we write these type of articles. And that's actually what's leading to the chasm in my mind. So I would argue that a lot of people focus on clicks, and the clicks actually work really well in a social world where things are distributed.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get ad dollars, but there's not a lot of ad dollars. Ad dollars are declining. It's the subscriber dollars that are going up. And if you think about timepieces, what timepieces was it was a higher valued annuity for time. That's it, right? Like media is a very simple business. It's either episodic revenue, which is advertisers, which is high dollar amount, short frequency, no consistency, or annuities, which is low dollar amounts, long consistency, but huge frequency, and you're right, and but it's a scale game. And so, like, the question I was faced with was a $40 paid subscription to time.com or an $800 timepiece or whatever it was at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I could provide all these other value exchanges with the consumer to justify the higher price point to bring you into a community that also unlocked a subscription.
I was taking notes through that whole thing because I think that's exactly correct, and is helpful information for us as we scale Coinage here and grow our audience. But yes, I think that is important. You know, the last piece.
Zach, if I can, you know what the biggest trick to you ensuring Coinage's objective?
Hmm.
Making sure you put in checks and balances that you're objective,
Well,
right? So
that is the thing actually that I think is
that's
most
it.
important. When we put this in place, we have our community of NFT holders that votes again on things that we do. So it's not just what I want, but also the checks and balances that I could be fired at any moment. If there is a vote of no confidence, I'm not host of this thing anymore, and you'd be speaking to somebody else, maybe Megan actually.
Well, hold on. Well, first of all, I love speaking to Megan, right? Like, if she's in the crowd, right? Like, and if Julie, if you're on now, just jump in at any point. But like, if Megan's in the crowd, I want her up on stage because she's just one of the smartest people I know.
Yeah.
But I am enjoying chatting with you about this one. But like, it's really important that if we want to find our way out of this situation, we have to be willing to listen to other people's opinions.
It's very
That's
true. That is actually at the heart of it, and that's kind of exactly what we try to do by having as many different points of view in our community as possible. Different founders from a lot of these chains, because you get into these echo chambers and it's really hard. No one can agree on fact, and so that's really what it was. But to your point, also that co-ownership piece, we spent months working on making sure. All right, how do we structure this legally to where we can give dividends back to our NFT holders if Coinage is able to eventually start making money, whether it be through sponsorship or if the IP gets picked up somewhere and distribution deals are struck. And that wasn't easy because regulation in the US, obviously, there's a lot of questions around that. But that's why we registered in Colorado as a legal cooperative. And Keith, that's one of the biggest questions, I think, because a lot of regulation speak right now is this is not the space for you if you want to build in the US. And that's been a discussion topic for us for the last probably month or two around the idea of maybe crypto isn't going to be finding a home in the US. It was important for us because as a media company covering a lot of things in the US, we wanted to be based here. But I'm curious to get your take on how some of that regulatory push dents the idea of, the mission of companies like Moonpay trying to help onboard people. If some of that stuff is so in question right now and you see, the crackdown on banking and everything else, what's your take on that and whether or not it makes you look, deeper at places outside the US?
so it's a funny question, and you would never know this, but when I was in college, my degree was I was a government major with a focus on American history, politics, and theory. Okay, so
It's a good mix.
as you can see, I'm doing so much with that degree. But all kidding aside, um, what that degree really taught me was how to think, and it was a wonderful degree. And I was with my advisor a few weeks ago at my alma mater, and I told her that under no circumstance would I ever regret that I had that degree because it really helped me sort of see through history and see things forward. Um, Look, like we are in I would say, a populist moment as it relates to emotions surrounding this space, right? And there's a huge difference between um, speech and action is number one, but then by politicians. But number two, politicians are correct in that like there has to be regulation that protects consumers, right? Like and the only way that large companies can adopt and evolve is with clear rules and guidelines on what does this mean. And do I think we're going to get there? Yes. Do I think we're going to get there, very soon? No, probably not. Do I think that we'll probably overcorrect? Yes. Do I think that FTX is one of the reasons why we'll overcorrect? Yes. Like that's, it was the most visible. Do I think FTX is a crypto problem? No. Right? FTX is a bad actor problem, right? And there are bad actors in every industry, right? If you went to telecom, there was MCI. If you went to the finance business, like traditional banking, there was Lehman Brothers, there's Bear Stearns, right? There was Bernie Madoff. If you went into health, there was Theranos. Like I could probably go through every industry. If you went into energy, there was Enron. Like I can go through every industry and I could show you bad actors in those industries.
Yeah.
And the problem with crypto is because it's so associated also with money, right? Like it adds another sort of layer of complexity. But no, I have faith that over time, one of the best aspects of the United States is its ability to always heal itself, right? And always sort of course correct to the median plus or minus one. So, like while we're in a moment where it's extreme, if you think about just the arc of AI and GPT, it was this unbelievable story being told that it was like the change all be all most wonderful thing on the planet until yesterday when it became like the devil's work, right? And
When it became the
then,
death of all humanity.
it's
But
just it's
that's what's important.
unbelievable.
So that's the other piece of it, though, too. And I feel like it's important for crypto specifically. And you and I are aligned in that mission in terms of making sure the mainstream audience is getting the truth in crypto. And you're right to point out there's difference between fraud and crypto itself being bad. And, that I think is so important about controlling the narrative and that where the real value comes from, right? Because if you co-own a media organization, you do control that narrative. And it's important for, people in the space. Obviously, myself as a believer in this space pushes the narrative that you're talking about, the true one, that it's not crypto is bad, it's crypto as a technology and it depends on how you want to use it. And I think that's important. But
So
Keith, you also mentioned Megan, and we got her up here.
oh,
We
amazing.
did it.
So you have to understand,
Megan's here.
I can't figure out how to mute this, right? So I'm getting
Yes.
like a little bit of a reverberation. So I have it under a pillow. But if Megan's up here, in 1 second, I want to go to this. But when I was at Wired, Kevin Kelly, who's one of the founding editors of Wired, right? And he has this amazing TED talk. And I actually tweeted it out the other day, and anyone should watch it. And it's like why the future will be sort of invented by optimists, right? Like you should pay attention to that because this is the most important TED talk in my opinion. But he used to always say to me one thing which I loved, which was no technology has been invented for good that can't be used for bad and vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like we just have to remember that it's the application of the technology by the individuals that determine whether it's good or bad. And I think that that's really important. Megan, how are you?
It's doing well. Hi, guys.
There you go.
Super energetic. Super energetic. No, hold on. I just want to give Megan her flowers for a second because since Julie LaRoche is staying silent on us and she does not want to talk, and I brought Sahil up.
No, I was muted.
Okay.
She's here now.
Perfect. So we have three great people on stage. And Zack, I can go 5 minutes extra if it's okay with you because
yes,
between Megan, Julia, and Sahil, I mean, boy, is this a great stage. And if I can, I just want to go through each of them for 1 second.
Sure.
So Megan is hands down just a gigantic brain. I don't know how to say it any other way. Is that not true, Zack? You know
no,
her
that's definitely true. No, Megan was one of the first people who believed in the idea of Coinage and got us off the ground.
And what I think is fascinating with Megan is where a lot of her time is spent is exactly where I think this space is going to evolve first, which is in the cultural evolution of the space, right? And so like while I can literally point out exactly how this space will disrupt and change the landscape for the financial industry, there's so many regulatory hurdles and so much that's going to be in the way that it's going to enter into the cultural realm first. And it'll most likely enter in through fashion and entertainment and, retail before it starts to go back into sort of businesses. And by the way, that's what happened with this device, right? Like when the iPhone first came out, everyone said that's not a business device. You could go back and go, the CEO of Microsoft made this joke at the time where he was like, business device, like it doesn't even have a keyboard, right? And like he couldn't even see where it went. And ultimately the iPhone permeated culture and then inflected back into business. And I think that that's what's going to happen with Web3. But I wanted Megan up because Megan, whether she's at First Light or whether as a VC or whether she's doing Red DAO, is doing amazing stuff. Yeah. Julia is important to me because, as I had said to you before, Julia, and this is hilarious, I was sharing with Zack the article that you did with me on March 22nd, 2021.
He remembers the date.
Right? With time entered in. And like, I remember before, and Julia, you could jump into this, like, I was on the phone with her explaining what we were doing, and she was the only one that would take my call on this, right? That's it. Like, and it was amazing. And I love her for that. And the reason I wanted Sahil up on stage is Sahil is actually a PhD and an adjunct professor, and he is focused on the Web3 space, right? And he's just a brilliant mind. And he also meant the world to me as a timepiece community member because he would always give me amazing advice and thoughts and perspectives on the space. And so, Zack, now I'm going to turn it to you as the host. We have three amazing people on stage between Sahil, Julia, and Megan. Who do you want to go to first?
You're giving me the options here. It's back in now in my control. But no, I mean, I think that network effect is extremely important. And technically, since Megan Casper is a Coinage network NFT holder, I would be inclined to let her speak as well, which is why we wanted her up here. And Megan, I think Keith, the whole space has really been giving you praise around this stuff, and I'd echo that too. But mostly because of all the work in fashion, in making this a cultural thing.
Yeah, well, to me, it sort of became obvious in 2015 that outside of the traditional the traditional finance industry, fashion would be another industry that would be massively disrupted, or just consumer products on chain in general. Yesterday, I was listening to a Twitter space, and to my complete surprise, I learned that there's over $53 trillion annually, that is exchanged in consumer products and commerce every year globally. So, and fashion is a very large, there's almost $2 trillion worth of that globally is a chunk of fashion. And I'm very excited to see not only products on chain, but the massive disruption that's going to come out of new business models and being able to have connected products, wearing something and having it chipped, NFC chipped or beacon chipped, tied to a smart contract on chain, being able to extract that data, and really harvesting and mining all the data around post-sale secondary analytics. Yeah, there's just so many new business models that are going to come out of this, and it's really exciting. We're still really early right now. There's little activations like Metaverse Fashion Week that are slowly getting the traditional fashion industry excited about Web3 technology applications, whether it's from the gaming side or connected products, and yeah, it's a very exciting time. We're still super. I feel like I created this small little group on WhatsApp with a bunch of people from NFT Paris, and we've got a little over 100 of the Web3 leaders in the space, and I talk to many of them every day, and I'm like, guys, this feels like Bitcoin in 2012. When I got into crypto in 2012, this is what it feels like for the fashion industry and consumer products.
Yeah.
It's a really exciting sector.
And that enthusiasm hasn't really waned either, even as we've seen kind of prices moving down. And I think, Julia, we were talking about your coverage of Starbucks as well. And that was the main thing is Megan's talking about consumer products and now seeing Starbucks jump into the space with their own Web3 experience. And I was like, it was great that Julia's here because she's been kind of spot on in covering Starbucks for the last few years and how they're really a tech company.
Yeah, I'm actually drinking Starbucks right now. I am not making that up. No, actually, it reminded me because the first time I actually heard Howard Schultz talk about like digital currencies and the potential of blockchain was in January of 2018. It was like the very end of that earnings call, and he was talking about like how it was like always been in their DNA to have this curiosity to see around corners and make big bets. So I don't think it was. I definitely don't think it's a surprise at all because I think that's kind of always been ingrained, and that was a big thing for them for mobile. And the one stat like I would just highlight for the rewards part is they already have more than 30.4 million active users on the rewards program, and more than, I think it's like 56% of the tender that's used in the store comes from that app, that rewards app. So it's really, they already have this incredible asset there. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how Odyssey plays out. I do not have access to it at this point. I tried signing up.
I tried.
I wasn't able to get access.
Keith got in. Keith got in the inside baseball move.
I will tell you this. I learned more about their Costa Rican facility than I ever thought I would. But like, I think that's absolutely fascinating, right? That they're monetizing my time and engagement.
That's
right?
true. For background, they make you go through these like questionnaires. You got to learn about Starbucks' history, and you got to learn about where the coffee comes from.
I would totally pass that test.
You would pass that test. I failed. It took me 5 times.
I thought it was great. And by the way, so Zach, since you don't know Sahil, like I just want to throw it over to Sahil because Sahil, here you are, and like you and I have known each other for a good part of a year and a half now, and we've spent a lot of time chatting back and forth, whether in text or on phone or in the classroom. I mean, as a PhD student who's focusing on this space, and as somebody who's also teaching students, will you first just introduce yourself to everyone, and then B, will you just give your perspective on the space?
GM, hello. Thanks for having me, Keith, and it's great to hearing you after a while. Since you moved to Moonpay, man, yeah, we are having a hard time.
Hold on. So I will pause you for 1 second because I see in the audience there's so many great timepiece artists. There's so many great artists. There's so many great timepiece community members, and I know I've been off of Twitter for a long time, and I was excited that we were doing this as a Twitter space too. And I apologize. Like, what I realized was none of you have known me when I was in sort of like rebuild mode. Like, you all know me post launch mode, right? And like Maya Drazen knows me in rebuild mode, right? But like when I came back to time, when I came, like to Wired, like, in 2008, back in the day, like coming back to it, or when I had to work on the launch of portfolio, or when I went to Bloomberg, or when I was doing all these things, I go heads down as I build. And like, we are just building and evolving Moonpay as quickly as possible. And like, I'm just not sleeping or doing anything. And so I miss you all and I love you all. I will be back. I just want to make sure that when I come back, like, you're all like, fuck, this is awesome. I love what Moonpay is doing for this space. And so you have my
quick
word.
enough, honestly. You can't, because that's what we're trying to do right now too, is find like the right partners to do this stuff and help it make it be easier for people to come in and mint this stuff. But Sahil, it's great to have you up here, and Keith, I appreciate you bringing him into this conversation as well, because it's really what it is. I mean, Megan has the invite for you. To your point earlier, the only way this wins is if we give up control. I can't actually invite people on the network side to mint our NFT. It's the people who mint them that earn the NFTs or the invites to bring other people in. So if Megan wants to give you one, I'll let her do that, because that's the only way that you can get into this one. But Sahil, I mean, I didn't want to cut you off. Keith was throwing it to you. I cut you off. My bad.
No. It's all good. And yeah, Keith, we love you too. You know that. So we are waiting for you to get this stuff done and bring the 1 billion people back, and then you come back to our beloved community, and we could just hang out as usual and having the Friday events and all those things. But anyway, just as I think you mentioned it all. So I'm a teacher. I'm a researcher. I do research on Web3 identity. And I think the identity in Web3 is one of the most fascinating aspects that is going to affect every single action of the future, business and consumerism, because in the future we are going to just deal with, hopefully, I hope that in the future we are going to deal with a bunch of wallets without exactly knowing who these folks are, what is their identity, what is their gender, what are their whatever, any demographics that we could capture from those individuals. And then that open doors for all those like consumer behavior specialists and practitioners and professionals in that space to see how they're going to target the future audience using wallets as individuals and as consumers. I think that's kind of one of the fascinating aspects. And again, going back to what just Megan mentioned, I think we are super early. Look, when we look at the technology adoption, the first 2.5% of people who are adopting a new technology are called the innovators, right? And look at how many people are dealing with Web3 and NFTs and all these things together. I don't think we are getting it even to like 5-10 million people. And that's not even like a fraction of a person. So I think we are still super early. And hopefully we are going to see this institution of Web3 evolving and getting more institutionalized, and we see more fascinating stuff coming out of it. Thanks for having me again.
Of course. I mean, Keith, I don't know if there's anything there to add. I mean, the institutional interest is also one that I think, Julie and I, when we were at Yahoo, were looking closely at in terms of where the money is going to be coming from to move the space forward.
So, look, like, I mean, you're seeing conflicting sort of comments on what the institutional interest really is. In some instances, you see certain banks look like they're targeted for helping crypto, but in other instances, you see Fidelity and NASDAQ entering in a big way, right? So, like, it's a very confusing moment in time from where the funding will come to enter into the ecosystem. And when you start to look at the VC funding, like, it seems to be holding up relatively well as well, right? So my thesis on Web3 adoption is that more companies will enter into Web3 that have established themselves already using technologies from places like Moonpay and others, right? There are a lot of great other companies as well. And there will be some companies that will go ground up Web3, but like the mass mainstream will be from companies that you know adopting the technology.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Again, I wanted to be respectful of your time, Keith, in terms of how long we've gone here on another Coinage chat. We
We
do
are
these.
Yes, we are over, but I have one more minute, so I apologize. Can I zoom in? Like on the video, I was told that I had to go back so Zach and my heads could match size.
Yes,
But like
that's right.
now that we're towards the end of this, I'm going to move forward if that's okay.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But no, we'd love to have you back on. Honestly, it took me too long to set this up. As I said, Megan was, out there saying you got to have Keith on because, he's one of the top minds in the space, in media, in Web3, and building what you're building at Moonpay. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. We do these every week on our Coinage account and post things to our YouTube page. I'd give a shout out to Julia LaRoche's YouTube page as well, by the way. You should definitely follow that if you're listening to this space and you don't.
Well,
Yeah, but Keith, we'll give you the parting words, man. We'll let you sign off.
look, I could Churchill quote anything, right? And Churchill has this great quote of difficulties mastered or opportunities won. He also has a great quote of like, when going through hell, you just keep going, right? And, is this a challenging moment in time? Yes, right? Like it's definitively a challenging moment in time. Will good come from this challenging moment in time? 100%, right? Like Warren Buffett also has that great quote of, like when the tide recedes, you see who went swimming naked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of people in the space that I think were making unbelievable promises that were not sort of delivering upon what the true value of the technology could be. And, there were a lot of charlatans in the space as well. And I think that what this pullback does is it really does allow people to focus on building. And I know that sounds cliche, but I think that it really does provide a great moment for the next stage of innovation to emerge from this space. And like, am I bullish on it? 100%. As I look at this group, right? Like it was an unbelievable showing today. There was a point where it like went above 1,300 people, right? And we're at, I don't know, a weird moment in crypto where we're in a crypto winter, but Bitcoin has rallied over 70% in Q1. And I look at this group and I see people who have been around since we launched time into Web3 that are still here, that still believe, that still are focused. And I love that. That makes me so happy. And so, for everyone who, believes in the space, like my ask of you is hear out people who don't believe in it. Don't turn them off, right? Like hear them out. It goes back to our, discourse. Like this is a technology. It shouldn't have a politicized view, right? It's just a technology. Talk to people about what the good is that can come from the space, right? And, my hope at Moonpay is that, we're a young company that is maturing up quickly. We went to bed, I would say 5:2, and we woke up 6:5, and we're figuring out how to make sure that like we can bring all of our pieces together to really onboard the masses into it. And when I look in the group, I see, the latest Moonpay hire in the group, who I'm not going to call out because it hasn't been publicized yet. But on my screen, that person is sitting in the top, 2 rows. And, I will give one hint, has an E in their name. Okay. But like I say this because like what we're going to continue to do is we're going to continue to hire, and we're going to continue to focus, and we're going to continue to build, and we're going to continue to grow to be able to onboard the masses. And so thank you so much, Zach, for having us and having me. And when I say us, I meant, Megan and Julia and Sahil, who I allowed to jump up on stage with us. But this was really fun. And I love what you're building over there. Congrats.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and obviously, again, it takes a lot of effort to onboard the masses. That was the topic of this space, and digging into it. Obviously, having you and Megan and Julie up here with us to kind of dive into it. I appreciate taking the time. Appreciate everybody for listening. By the way, that was Keith Grossman, former president of Time and now president of Enterprise at Moonpay. Thanks again to everybody on the space, to Megan, to Julia, to Keith, to Sahil. Thank you for everybody taking the time out of your day to listen to it. We do these every week on Coinage. If you're not subscribed on the YouTube, feel free to do so as well. And congrats as well to our winners on the Gleam link and winning Coinage subscriber NFTs, the ability to co-own the show and what we're building at Coinage. We are your show now. Thanks again to everybody for listening. We appreciate it.
you all.
We'll see you soon.
Have a great one.